All right, hello everybody that has joined. See, we have a lot of visitors and also Ivy Tech employees and students as well. Again, my name is Jay. I'm the Executive Director over Diversity, Equity, and Belonging for Central Indiana. I did not turn my video on primarily because there's something behind me. I'm not sure what it is on my curtain, but I'm just gonna keep my video off just to be on the safe side. I think it's a spider, but I don't want it to be distracting. But I wanted to definitely talk about this topic of Black lives and queer spaces. We know that it is a timely topic, especially what's going on in our nation, which just really is a cycle of events that has been going on through our history. This isn't anything new. We know that Black lives have been a topic of discussion for hundreds upon hundreds of years. And particularly for Pride Month, it is something that has been circulated about Black lives and Black Lives Matter and the social justice movements. Are we missing the mark when it comes to talking about Black issues by not being intersectional? Should we talk about LGBTQ plus community a lot more? Do we understand that when we say, and especially different organizations, different individuals may say Black Lives Matter or social justice organizations, are those all encompassing of what's going on within all individuals, the intersections of individuals, the full makeup of what makes up a person? So I am very, very happy to introduce Terrell Parker, who is the co-founder of Indiana Pride of Color in Indianapolis. But also he's the CEO of Black Dream Company, and he works for NMAC in Washington, D.C. So he's going to talk a little bit about Black lives in queer spaces and a little bit more about intersectionality as well. So on behalf of Ivy Tech, I want to welcome you and welcome Terrell Parker.
Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well, and I hope you all can see me and hear me just fine. I see someone's head shaking, Amanda, so thank you for letting me know that I'm ready to go. I just wanted to first start by thanking Jay for the invitation for me to attend tonight's session. I'm really excited to share information with you all. I think we're living in a really critical time where information is key, it's critical to our growth, and really to our survival. So thank you to Jay for allowing me to share some of my perspectives and some of my experiences related to this topic that we're going to discuss today. So without further ado, let's get started with today's presentation. So a quick overview of today's presentation. We will start by talking or learning a little bit about me. Sorry, we're not in person, so I can't learn more about you all. We're going to talk about what does it mean living in the intersections, and what does intersectionality mean? I know we hear this term often. I'm going to try to break it down to you all from my perspective so that you can easily understand what it means and how it relates to the Black Lives Matter movement and really the call for all Black lives to matter within the Black Lives Matter movement. Next, we're going to talk about some queer and Black history. And finally, we're going to talk about queer lives today and what is this fight for liberation and what is it all about? So, who am I? I am a proud Black gay male. I usually say this when I enter most rooms. I say this when I enter spaces that are predominantly white, and sometimes I say this when I enter spaces that are Black but predominantly heterosexual. Imagine 3 or 4 years ago when I was working at Brothers United, a local organization now known as BU Wellness Network, and we had a crime prevention grant. So imagine sitting at a table with cops and Black men who got the crime prevention grant, and you say, my name's Terrell Parker, and I'm a proud Black gay male. So that's very profound for me. And I do that, and I say that for a reason. I do that and I say that to affirm youth and other people who may not have had the example to see someone who is comfortable and who is open with just living honestly in their truth and not being afraid to, I wouldn't say that I lead with it, but I'm not afraid of it. I don't shy away from it. And as I explain it to people in the room, I usually lead with this because it informs my advocacy. It informs the questions that I ask, the work that I do, my identity, who I am informs everything about me. So I like to introduce myself that way sometimes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. That means I identify with masculine pronouns. A little bit about me besides being a Black gay male, because that's not all there is to me. I'm an Indianapolis native. I am an IPS grad, George Washington Community High School, Continentals. I grew up in a single parent household on the west side of Indianapolis. I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm an uncle, and I'm a friend. And the reason why I say that, and I added that to my presentation, honestly, at the last minute, was just because I wanted you to see the whole person of who I am. And when we talk about Black lives existing in queer spaces or queer lives existing in Black spaces, we have to understand that they've always existed and they've always been there because they've been our family members, they've been our friends, but a lot of times it's been hidden. So we're going to talk about visibility a little bit later on today. But I think it's important for us to, one, realize that queer people, Black people, trans people, they're everywhere. They're all around us. People we work with, people we live with, people we love. I graduated from Franklin College. I have 2 awards at my college that are named after me. The Terrell Parker Diversity Leadership Award that is given away to a senior member of the Black Student Union every year, and the LGBTQ Lifetime Achievement Award. This was created last year. And the only reason why I say that is not to brag, but just to let people know that I'm about that liberation life, as you can see from my PowerPoint. I've been heavily involved in social activism really since high school through college and transitioned into my professional career to really make it about uplifting the voices of marginalized communities. I'm the former executive director for BU Wellness Network, and as Jay mentioned, I'm the founding president of Indiana Pride of Color, a local organization in Indianapolis. And here are a few pictures of me. Next, I really wanted to start when we talk about identity, because I think this conversation is so important. The conversation was entitled Black Lives in Queer Spaces, but if you notice, I said we can easily flip it and we can title the conversation Queer Lives in Black Spaces, because I think both topics are relevant and important today. So we're going to have both conversations because my life and my existence, my identity is intersectionality. So identity, just very plainly, is defined as the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. So your identity is simply being who you are and knowing who you are. I found a quote. Well, I actually heard this from someone, and I think it really speaks to the topic of intersectionality, understanding identity and understanding what it means to navigate as a queer person and a Black person in this country. So the world let me know that I was Black before I was gay. Then Black people let me know that although I am Black, my sexuality made me different. So just pause, think. What does that quote say to you? That's the real life lived experience of a person of color, a Black person who also walks and exists in the world as queer. When we walk out of the house, first thing we probably realize is that we were Black. Discrimination and racism is very real in this country. So as a person of color, as a Black person, you feel it. So imagine already feeling othered by the general society. And then you go to a close-knit community with people that look like you, and you expect to be embraced, and you expect to be accepted, to belong, to be affirmed, supported in who you are. And then you're told, sorry, you're othered again because you're gay, because you're trans, because you're lesbian, because you're bi. So to walk around in this country as a Black person who's also queer is to often struggle with that duality. A world outside of my house does not affirm me. Inside my house, I may not be affirmed also. So that's at the very basic core, some of the challenges that go with identities and intersecting identities. So what is intersectionality? I know we've all heard of the term. Intersectionality was first coined by civil rights icon and advocate Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly saw that Black women in particular were experiencing a high level of workplace discrimination. However, there was nothing to describe the plight of what they were experiencing. Because for Black women who went to people who were Black, their male Black counterparts said, we don't feel like we're getting discriminated against. When they went to their white female counterparts to say, hey, can you support us? They said, well, we don't feel like we're getting discriminated against as women. So if you're not getting discriminated against as a Black person, but you're not getting discriminated against as a woman, what do you combine something that brings those two factors together? That's intersectionality. So Black women in particular face life differently than, let's say, cisgender heterosexual Black men. Same concept goes within the LGBTQ community. As a Black male, cisgender identified Black male, my plight and my experiences are going to be totally different than a Black male who identifies as heterosexual. There are some things that we can agree with, shared experiences, shared life experiences that are due to our race, but then there are things that are vastly different due to our sexuality. So intersectionality really helps to promote an understanding of human beings that it's not just happenstance, it's not just circumstance. People are intimately shaped by the interactions and their social identity. So I love the graphic on the chart that says race, education, sexuality, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, language, and class. These are all parts of people's identity. These are all structural systems that can potentially intersect and impact a person's experience in this country, in this state, in this city, in their county, and not just their experience, but what's most important is how do they then navigate that experience? So now that we talked a little bit about intersectionality, I want to go to talk about history. Happy Pride. We're in the middle of Pride Month. I know you all have probably seen the memes all over social media that said Pride started as a riot. And that is so true. Pride started as a riot. June 28th, 1969, New York City. So when we look at the connection and the commonality between people taking to the streets now, resisting police brutality, Black Lives Matter, we have to understand that there is a common and consistent thread of oppression by the police. Stonewall was started as resistance by the police. Imagine you're driving down Mass Ave today. You stop at Metro. I'm using terms because I would imagine that most people are pretty familiar with Indianapolis. If you're not, Mass Ave is a pretty popular street on Indianapolis. There are quite a few number of either LGBTQ owned businesses or LGBTQ affirming businesses. So imagine a Friday night, Mass Ave, you're standing in front of Teenies, you're standing in front of Metro. Well, you wouldn't even be standing in front of there now, you would be inside. But imagine you're just going out for a drink to meet your friends, to have a good time. And then all of a sudden, cops raid the place. They arrest you, they arrest the owners of the bar, they arrest the bartenders, they release your name on social media saying that you were involved in a gay LGBTQ raid. This was the reality for LGBTQ people around the country. We know that for a long time, homosexuality was listed as a mental illness. And we know that for a long time, LGBTQ people were extremely over-policed. They were not able to gather in public. They were not able to hold hands in public. They were not able to kiss in public because they were liable to be beaten by the police. They were liable to be arrested, and they were liable to be publicly humiliated. And this was the reality for people not that long ago. So what sparked Stonewall? Drag queens and trans women said, we've had enough and we're not taking it anymore. And one person threw a brick, and that brick led to several days of resistance, several days of protest, and ultimately what we now know as Pride Month, what we see all around these countries, these elaborate celebrations of identity and owning who you are. It all started because people were tired of being oppressed, and ultimately because people were not able and allowed to live as their authentic selves. So the two individuals that are posted here are two trailblazing icons. The work that they did is well beyond its time. We have Sylvia Rivera, a Latina trans woman who started her own organization in New York City that housed, clothed, and fed trans women. And then we have Marsha P. Johnson, a civil rights leader, who also started her organization to help resist police brutality and to help trans women get off the street, to have an education, to have an opportunity. So when we look at Stonewall, we know that it was started by queer people of color specifically. And that's important to note because oftentimes we see a retelling of history that isn't true to the actual moment. So, Black queer history. Here's another picture of Marsha P. Johnson, legendary civil rights trailblazer. And then we have Bayard Rustin. How many people have heard of Bayard Rustin? If you've heard of him, can you just raise your hand if I can see your face? Okay, so I have one. So I'm saying 50-50 because I can see two people only. So one person raised their hand and one person didn't. And that's pretty common. But if I was to ask you if you've heard of Martin Luther King, raise your hand. Yeah, if you've heard of the March on Washington, raise your hand. Everyone raises their hand, right? Most people don't know that Bayard Rustin actually planned and organized and implemented the March on Washington. And Martin Luther King got all of the credit. And why did he get all of the credit? Because Bayard Rustin was gay. And during the 1960s, it was unheard of to have a gay Black man leading the civil rights movement. It was unheard of. George Washington Carver. How many of you have heard of him? Most people have probably heard of him. And he's known for his revolutionary use of the peanut. Most people know him for the peanut butter. I promise you, I did not learn this until today. I did not learn that he was a queer man. He was a queer identified man. I literally learned this today from a friend. He shared a resource with me of the top 10 queer people who need their own biopics. I shared the link in the PowerPoint. I'll share the slides afterwards in case you want to see that list. But I had no idea. And then he shared another resource with me that affirmed it. And it just made me think about George Washington Carver, one of the most revolutionary scientists, inventors in history, not just in Black history, in history. But we never knew that he had a queer identity. Imagine the difference that might make for a young queer child struggling with their identity to know that. And then next, we have Audre Lorde, a famous poet. Most people know Audre Lorde because she coined a very important term related to self-care. That self-care is a revolutionary act. So if you've ever heard that term, you can attribute that to Audre Lorde. An amazing, amazing queer writer, feminist thought leader. So there are so many civil rights queer icons throughout the course of history, and they exist, but we often don't have the opportunity to learn them. So that's why I love this quote. Black history is American history. We've heard that. We've probably heard that tons. But queer history is Black history. So Black history is American history, and queer history is Black history, period. So how do we integrate the two, and how do we make sure that we're telling a complete story about our country and about people who deserve to have an icon, to have someone to look up to? So what leads to Black queer people often being a footnote in history? These are some things from my perspective. I think oftentimes it can be tokenism. You have one person, you have one Black queer person, one Black person in your organization, and oftentimes that one is often seen as enough, but it's not. We have to constantly create space and room and expand the net to invite more people to the table. Because if you've ever been the only one in a room full of people who don't look like you, you know the intense pressure that comes along with that. That comes with feeling as if you're not just speaking for yourself, but you're speaking for an entire group of people. And we also have to understand that people's experiences aren't monolithic. So that's also important as well. So you need a diverse group of individuals that can bring different perspectives, because my queer identity is different from someone else's queer identity. My experience as a Black person is also different from someone else's experience as a Black person as well. And next is visibility. So there's layers to the pyramid, obviously. So the next layer is visibility. I saw a really amazing quote by Janet Mock today that said, "My visibility should not be due to such extreme circumstances." And now, especially, we're talking about issues of police brutality, we're talking about issues of racism, but what got us to that point? What got us to the point that these issues were visible? It was an extreme circumstance. So that's what Janet Mock means. For marginalized or oppressed groups of people, it also often seems our visibility comes at our detriment. We don't start talking about health inequities and health disparities until a major catastrophe like COVID-19 comes along and shines the light on it. And then we start to realize we have to pay attention to the health inequities for people of color. So visibility should not come due to extreme circumstances. Yes, we want visibility. We want trans people to be on the front. We want non-binary people to be on the front. We want queer people to be on the front. We want people of color to be on the front. But there's more than just being on the front line. There's more than just being visible. At the next level, there's inclusion. Do I occupy a seat at the table? Does my voice matter? Am I included in the initial planning process? Am I included in the beginning, or am I included after all of the decisions have been made? We've already allocated the money and the resources, and now we just want your opinion. Do I have a say-so? Do I have a vote? Can I invite other people to attend? What does it really mean to be meaningfully included? And then for me, ultimately, the highest level of the pyramid is about ownership. Not only am I included, but do I get to lead? Do I get to implement my ideas that come from my perspective, that come from my lived experience? And ultimately, do I have autonomy? Do I have autonomy to act independently? Do I have autonomy to bring my real, true, authentic self into the room? Oftentimes, these things have not happened. So Black queer people have been tokenized, and oftentimes they've been the only one. So it's really easy to relegate someone and leave someone out of history if you can only think of one person. So next, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this presentation while we're all here to talk about Black lives and queer spaces. So I would just like to give a disclaimer and say that I am speaking from my perspective and my perspective only. And as I said, my perspective is informed by my experiences and my knowledge. So Ghetto 101, what does it mean to be a Black life in a queer space? Not going to say any names because I'm not that type of guy, but in 2015, I was called into a meeting with the local nightclub here in town. The nightclub had gotten called out on social media by some people for their music policy. They implemented a music policy called Ghetto 101. there was an influx of Black patrons, and this is an LGBTQ bar, affirming bar, a safe space for all LGBTQ people. But due to a new influx of people of color that attended their bar, they had saw a rise or an uptick in physical altercations. And their solution was to implement a policy called Ghetto 101. And that policy was that they would no longer play hip hop music, rap music, or any music that they felt like this community would like to hear, because they were trying to deter them from coming to their club. Their assumption was, if we don't play their music, they won't come to our club. This story was leaked by one of their employees to social media, and I was called in to offer my opinion. And I give this example to illustrate what it means to be a Black life in a queer space, even if it is a queer Black life in a queer space. It's to still feel as though you're othered and to still feel as though you're not made to belong. I often ask myself when I am invited to the table, I'm at the table, but does my voice matter? I was working with a local organization, for example, and I was asked to participate on a project. I participated on the project. We had one meeting. After the meeting, an agenda was sent out for what we thought a program should be for an event that we were planning, that several organizations were planning. My response was, I think the agenda is great, but I would like to offer a suggestion. I would like to offer that we add an additional host to our event, because this will ensure that the event appeals to a mass amount of people. This will attract people from a different audience, and it will really help to diversify the event. I was met with so much resistance by a queer white leader in the community, because I was told that I hurt the feelings of people who had worked hard to plan the event, and that they just didn't understand why we had come up with an agenda and I wanted to make all of these changes. And, this person called me for breakfast to have this meeting because he said he didn't want to discuss it via email, something that was very important. So, we sat down, I'm like, is everything okay? And then he starts explaining to me how several people, all Caucasian, unfortunately, because this was another one of those situations where I was one of one Black face in the room, that I had offended everyone. And I said, well, how did I offend everyone? I just didn't really understand. And my response to him was quite boldly, don't invite me to a table if you don't want to hear my voice, because I will never be a face. I will never be someone who's just there to shake their head and say yes. I will never be tokenized. So if my voice doesn't matter, do not invite me to the table. So I say that because oppression within an already oppressed group, it definitely exists. And sometimes we would like to think that because I'm a Black person, I cannot discriminate against my Latinx siblings because I understand racism. But in all actuality, that sometimes can happen due to misunderstanding, because oppression still exists even within other groups that are oppressed. So even within the queer community, oppression exists. Racism and ignorance is pervasive in our larger society. So the LGBTQ community is vastly diverse. It's one of the most diverse communities out there because it does bring together people from every other racial and ethnic group, because there are queer people in every group. So do you get where I'm going with this? So there's so much diversity that there is the opportunity for oppression, racism, and ignorance to exist within this group. But I think it exists differently. It may not exist as outward racism. A lot of times I think it, for me, once again, our statements, my personal experience, it's come off in the form of a lot of ignorance. It's come off in the forms of policies that say, we don't discriminate against Black people. We just don't want those people that are going to cause fights. So let's just implement a program that targets hip hop music, so it's very coded. It's not racism. We just don't want our bar torn up. It's not that we don't value your opinion. It's just that maybe you should have said it in a way that was a little less confrontational. Or maybe you couldn't have offended someone or hurt their feelings. And I would say lastly, how I have seen Black lives existing in queer spaces, I've seen clear discrimination in funding. I have spent the majority of my career working in HIV. The CDC projects that 1 in 2 Black gay men will contract HIV within their lifetime. If you add up every woman living with HIV in this country, every newly diagnosed woman living with HIV in this country last year, take out Black women, add every other group, Black women still outnumber them. So if you were to add White women, Latinx women, Native women, Pacific Islander women, and the list goes on and on and on. Add all those women together, and there's still more Black women that contract HIV every year. When you look at funding doesn't necessarily flow to organizations that directly serve Black queer people. Funding flows to majority-led organizations that have the fiscal capacity or the fiscal infrastructure to deliver the grants. That's systemic racism right there. The system is set up, the bar is set so high that a small community-based organization that has the knowledge, has the experience, has the connection to the community, works directly with queer Black people, they don't get the money. Majority white organizations do. That's discrimination in funding. So when I think about collectively, like my experience over the last 7 or 8 years being a Black person who has tried to kind of be a bridge between communities, this is a summation of my experience. Now, of course, in every situation, there are I meet a lot of really nice people, a lot of really well-intentioned people, but I think it has not been until right now that we've really gotten to a place where we're, okay, intentions are great, but let's go beyond intentions and let's create action items, actionable items that we can accomplish. Let's educate ourselves. Let's become more knowledgeable. So I think now we're in that space to where it's happening, but so much of my experience as a Black body in queer spaces has been this, as you see on the screen. All Black lives matter. This has been something that people have been screaming, that people have been saying, because violence against Black trans women is very real. Last year, 28 Black trans women died. And then we're also seeing the erasure of Black queer lives in the Black Lives Matter movement. If I was to say how many people know George Floyd, I'm pretty sure everyone will raise their hand at this point. If I would say how many people know Tony McDade, show of hands once again for my 2 or 3 people that I can see. How many people know Tony McDade? No one. Oh, okay, we got one person. 50-50. Okay, we got one other person. Okay, so we're good. We're at 66%. But unfortunately, Tony McDade's name does not get as much media attention. He was also killed by the police in a very similar fashion. But Tony McDade is a male of Black trans experience. He's a Black trans male. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter and all Black lives mattering, for people, once again, on the intersections, for people who are Black, but people who are also queer, we may have been victimized by racism in the outside world, but a lot of times the discrimination that we feel and face and experience, the erasure comes within our own Black community. So this is us screaming loudly to the Black community saying, for the first time, we're not going to be relegated to the back. We're not going to plan the entire March on Washington and get no credit for it and be erased through history. All Black lives must matter. We must raise and elevate Tony McDade's name to the same level that we raise and elevate George Floyd's name. And until we do that, we cannot say that all Black lives matter. And then Ayanna Dior, which is the picture that you see on top, is a picture of a young Black trans woman that was brutally beaten in Minneapolis, the city of George Floyd's murder, the spark to much of the national protests that we see now. She was beaten. Maybe about 2 weeks ago, there was a viral video of about 10 Black men physically beating her and assaulting her. And this is also the call to action to Black people. You know, all Black lives must matter. Ayanna Dior is marching on the front lines for Black men who will ignore her, erase her, and kill her. So this is why queer Black people are screaming to the top of their lungs. And you'll hear some discussion in the Black community about, you know, sticking together, togetherness. We were always taught culturally that our issues are our issues stay in the house. We don't bring our issues outside. You know, so that's that Black community that's struggling, you know, like we just all need to be on the same page. We just need to fight police brutality. Queer people don't need to yell, but queer people are saying, no, that was the past. Now we're in a place to where we can do both. We can fight for Black lives and police brutality, but we can also hold Black people accountable within our own community to lead by example. I think we also talk about all Black lives mattering. We have to exist that health inequities are very real. As I said earlier, Black gay men and Black trans women are more likely to contract HIV. Black queer people are more likely to experience housing inefficiency. Black queer youth are more likely to experience homelessness, sometimes almost at 4 times higher of a rate than their queer white counterparts. And then this leads to things like disparities in employment, education, and even incarceration. So this is what it means to sometimes live on the intersection of being Black and being queer. You have to deal with things that are unique to your identity as a Black person, your identity that's unique to you as a queer person. And some of the biggest challenges is, where do I belong? Because I'm kind of othered no matter where I go. And then lastly, just wanted to talk about discrimination and bullying in the workplace / home and the Supreme Court's decision. So I shared my experience of going through bullying at my last place of employment and being terminated, ultimately because of my sexuality. I was told that I wasn't a good fit for the organization. My perspective, that was code for, you're too gay for this organization. So due to some programming that I attempted to bring to the organization that would include queer youth, I was written up and then I was verbally harassed and abused for probably about 3 months following, until I was told that I wasn't fit for the good organization and I had 30 more days to find another job. So I've never talked about this experience publicly until this week when the Supreme Court made their decision. And I got so many reactions from people who were saying, thank you for sharing your story and how powerful it was. But it was powerful for me because it really signified, one, why this decision was so important and why workplace protections must take place so that people aren't victimized and bullied in the workplace. But also, it was a real life example of intersectionality because I was working for an organization that had a board of directors that was 95% Black. So it meant they looked like me, looked just like me. The organization was focused on eliminating health disparities within the minority community. And I was executive director of that organization. So I went to an organization that was for people of color, that was for Black people, to make an impact on health disparities and health inequities in my community. And I was bullied and victimized because of my sexuality. So that's what it means to be a to be a queer life in a Black space. Oftentimes, you're met with that bullying. And one thing that was very profound to me when I was let go from my job is they said, Terrell, you'll be brilliant. You'll be great. We'll even write you a letter of recommendation somewhere else, but you're just not a good fit for us. And this was also the same person that told me, you know, I just don't understand. I just don't understand why you have to go broadcast it. People wouldn't have a problem with it if you would just be quiet. So that's what it means oftentimes. It means not being able to be your authentic self, having to tuck parts of who you are away. So this is my slide in honor of the 28 trans women Black trans women who were murdered last year. This year, I believe there has been at least 15 Black trans women who have been murdered. And also there's a major call to action for Puerto Rico as well that has seen a large number of violence against trans women, Latinx trans women. So moving forward, it's not all doom and gloom. I think we have to expand the net through inclusion and through intersectionality. Intersectionality is really a powerful tool because it really does help us understand people's identity and what they're going through, how they're navigating through the world, some of the trauma they've experienced, and just also why we should give people some grace and a little more understanding. I talk from my perspective as a Black gay male, but I also understand that there's a certain level of privilege that I do experience because I am cisgender and because I am a male as well. And I also understand that for Black trans women, for other women of color, for immigrants, for people who are differently abled, there are also a set of challenges that they experience as well. So I think we have to expand the net. And I think we have to really do our due diligence to make sure that we're creating intersectional movements that include everyone. And that not only that, we allow everyone the opportunity to bring them full selves into the room, into the picture, into the movement. I think we should also ask ourselves, what does it mean to be anti-racist within the LGBTQ community? We do have a role to play within the LGBTQ community because we are so diverse, because we do bring people from every ethnicity, from every race together under the umbrella of LGBTQ. We do have the opportunity to lead by example. What does it mean to truly be inclusive? What does it truly mean to be anti-racist? And we can show by example that it's possible. Next, we have to ask ourselves as a Black community, how can we be pro-LGBTQ? We have to understand and we have to realize the commonalities, the similarities within our threads. As I said, Stonewall riot was started to oppose police brutality. People are taken to the streets in such large droves now to oppose systemic racism, but the vehicle for that was police brutality. There's a commonality. So how can we as a Black community start to be pro-LGBTQ, start to support LGBTQ youth primarily? Because it's extremely important. And lastly, one of my favorite quotes, hearts and minds can change, but policy helps. We saw this with the landmark Supreme Court decision just this week, but the work's not done. That case does not protect individuals that work for smaller companies, for small businesses who employ less than 15 people. They're not held to that same ruling. So the organization that I worked for that bullied me, guess what? Less than 15 people. So they don't have to apply to that rule. So there's still so much more work that needs to be done. And from my perspective, it really needs to be done at the hearts and mind level as well, but also at the policy level. So what can we be doing to be more actively involved in policy decisions? The Equality Act, we're still working to push the Equality Act to pass, which would further extend protections for LGBTQ people in the workplace and more broadly as well. We've seen the erasure of trans people. Just this past week, we saw the administration further try to erase trans people from our healthcare system. And that's the battle that we fight. We see the fight for immigration that is still ever present. We see the fight for Black lives. So from my perspective, hearts and minds can change, but we have to be moving forward from a policy perspective to make sure that we don't just rely on hearts and minds. And then a few terms I'll share through this PowerPoint. And there are clickable links, which are gender, which is how we identify our gender identity, sexuality. There's a difference between gender identity and sexuality. Always want to make that known. Sexuality is who we love. Gender is who we are. What is transgender? Meaning someone who transitions from one gender to another, sex at birth to transition to the sex that they identify with now currently. Non-binary, which are individuals who may not identify with either gender, or they may identify with aspects of both genders as well. And then pronouns, my pronouns are he, him, his. Other pronouns, she, her, hers, feminine, and they, them, their, which are gender neutral pronouns as well. And I'll have links to each of those that I'll share with you that further expands on those definitions. But I didn't want to spend too much time on definitions. I wanted to take the rest of time for Q&A. I'm sorry, I feel like I talked a lot. Question and answer. I think you're muted, Jay.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for that. And that was a wealth of information. I don't think you talked too much. It was right on point. And you talked about some very poignant points that at Ivy Tech we're trying to resolve as well too. You know, we have a strategic initiative, Goal 8, which we are striving to help others feel like they belong. So like you mentioned before, it's more than just having a seat at the table. You have to have a voice at the table. We can include people all day long, but if they don't have a voice at the table when it comes to decision making, when it comes to having their voice heard, you know, are we doing our best bet? So I want to open this up to questions if anyone has any questions. And if people don't have any questions, I have some as well that are surfacing in my head. So I'm going to unmute everyone. I'm going to allow everyone to unmute themselves if they have a question. So go ahead and unmute yourself if you have any questions for Terrell.
I have a question. I don't know if I'm the first to raise their hand.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right. How you doing, Terrell? I'm in a good.
Yes, I'm great.
I'm in a small town near one of our campuses, a largely white town. I took to heart what you were saying about including African Americans, people who would be othered in other circumstances in decision making and what have you. With the current protest environment, we do have some groups here in town that are organizing to try to do something in conjunction with worldwide protests related to George Floyd's killing. But we're a largely white town, and a lot of us want to be allies. Some African Americans in town feel vulnerable, perhaps stepping forward in such a situation as this. So how can we be allies? How can we invite participation when, let's face it, we're often in very white communities?
Mm-hmm. I would say that there is power and there's strength in numbers. I was actually facilitating a men's support group earlier this week, and the question that I asked them is, what gives you hope? And this was a group of all Black gay men, and they said, what gives them hope is seeing the diversity of people that are marching. And that was a pretty consistent thread among the folks who were older in the group and also the folks who were younger in the group. And in particular, one person commented and they said, wow, I saw people in Carmel marching and Fishers marching and Beech Grove marching and all of these communities that are predominantly white that were out marching in numbers, and that's inspiring. So I would say continue to march, continue to show your support. And then I will also say there are a lot of different ways. I think on a personal level, someone said, I heard this the other day, so I can't take credit for this. They said, you can't say that you're anti-racist if you don't have people of color sitting at your dinner table. People that don't look like you sitting at your dinner table. So I think I took that to heart myself personally as an opportunity for me to also grow my net. So I would say on a personal level, if we don't have diverse circles, diverse people who are sitting across from us, sharing a meal with us that we're learning from, I think we can start there. I think there are also ways that we can create dialogue and space for communication within our small communities. And then I think there are also some institutional changes. So I've been telling everyone, like, everyone occupies a space and we all have a role to play if we're going to end racism. So if you sit on a board of directors, what is your board of directors doing to diversify itself? What are they doing to diversify their programming or their mission or their reach? You know, if you're working in HR, what policies are you implementing to make sure that your organization is anti-racist? You know, if you're, I told my friend this, you may not be in a position at your organization to where you can make systemic changes, but what are you doing to challenge the leadership? I've been telling people it's 2020, the time for challenge and accountability is now. And the time for creating a plan. So I say all that to say, there's levels. We can do it at a personal level, we can do it at a community level, or we can do it at an institutional level. But I would say just start with a plan. Say, I'm going to do 2 or 3 things. This is what I can personally commit to doing from my seat that I sit in to end racism. And just start there. I would say just start there. And what's most important, I think for me as a Black person, saying an ally, I think marching is great because I think we've moved to the point to where people see the issue. But now I'm really just wanting to see action, people who are taking action and making steps that just further affirms that you're an ally and that you really do support the movement and that you're willing to go beyond just lip service. Because now I don't know if it's just because we live in a cynical world and we just think that, people make empty statements, but I think now we're at the point to where every major corporation is releasing a statement. So now that can even potentially be empty. So now we have to go beyond that, beyond just a statement into action. So kudos to you for doing everything that you're doing now and just continue to do what you can from your perspective.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question. Wonderful presentation, by the way, so thank you so much. My question is, in your personal experience, have you noticed like a common point with individuals or organizations, whatever the case may be, where you realize that you're not going to be able to change their mind and it's time to just move on with either, like I said, with either people or groups? Because, personally, and those of us who are, trying to learn and grow, I'm sure we don't want to just keep beating our head against a wall in something that's not going to ever have any sort of change. And we would rather put our efforts towards things that can move towards positive change. Like, have you noticed like what that point is when you're like, nothing's going to change here?
For me, it's people's inability to listen and to hear you, because that's really critical for me. I was actually sharing this advice with a friend. She was arguing with someone on social media today, and then my advice to her was, I said, I don't really waste my breath on people who don't even possess the ability to listen, because at that point it's just a wasted time or a wasted conversation. Because at that point I'm just talking at someone, I'm talking to someone. So I use that as an example, but I would use that in the context of institutions as well. If the institutional leaders just aren't listening, they aren't even willing to hear you, we can't even establish common ground where we say, okay, this is at least the problem. Can we all at least agree on the problem and then build from there? And then if there's no listening involved, that there's not even the ability to establish any type of common ground, then that's when I think it's a waste of time. Me personally, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I am that person. I will try to educate, I will try to inform, I will try to reach you again and again and again and again. I have this debate with a lot of people. I have this debate with folks who say, if you agree with this president, like this status so I can delete you right now. I'm not that person, because I believe that if I deleted everyone who I disagree with, then there's no opportunity to change a mind or to provide more information. So I sometimes go above and beyond to try to educate and reach people. Now there are people on the other side of the spectrum that are like, you better educate your damn self. Excuse my language. So I think you do see that difference. But for me personally, if we can't establish common ground, or if there's no listening involved, then maybe that's when it's my time to use my energy and effort somewhere else.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else have any questions?
I don't have a question, but the point that really struck me and resonated with me, and Jay, I think you said this a few minutes ago, having a seat at the table is different than having a voice at the table. And I'm working with a group that wants to diversify their membership, but I want them to avoid just bringing on token people.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very hard, you know, and a lot of times, I don't think you realize tokenism when it's taking place, because a lot of times I don't think it's intended to be tokenism.
Yeah.
But now what I've started to tell people is I'm not the only Black gay person. I'm not the only Black gay person in Indianapolis who can talk and who to speak. And I've gotten several invitations over the last few weeks to do different types of webinars and things like that. And I've started to refer them out to other people, because I'm like, I'm not the only one, but we have to do our due diligence to recruit people and to understand that we have to go to the places where we need to recruit those people. You know, so one thing I love about different boards and different groups is we have an opportunity to create like a board matrix, where we can identify like the different skill sets for people that we want on our board. But we also, like for some boards that I work for, there's a clear like racial and ethnic matrix. Like we want to make sure that we have enough number of Black people and Latinx and American Indian people. We want to make sure we have enough women. So we have a board matrix, and we look at that board matrix every year. And when we go to recruit new members, we look and we say, okay, who are we missing? Who's not at the table? Let's bring them to the table. But it's never a conversation of let's bring one. It's who are a group of people. Can we come up with 10? If we need 3 people, can we come up with 10 names of people that identify or people who fall within this group? Can we make very specific efforts to recruit people from this group? But I think one thing that what people will realize, I'm a pretty straightforward person, so I'm just going to speak pretty candidly. I think sometimes when you do merge different groups from maybe different backgrounds, maybe different, you know, just different diverse groups, there are growing pains, there are challenges, there may be communication barriers, there may be cultural issues that are different. Those things are going to take place, but it's understanding that those things are going to take place. But how do we create a culture and a system that invites in diversity and not shies away from it? And a lot of times, people won't say this, but from my experience working places, we are really afraid of the change and how people will interact and things like that. But we can't let our fears hold us back. I would just say, if you want to diversify that board or that group, be very specific about what diversity looks like. Be very specific and intentional about who you want to recruit, who you want to engage. Set a goal, but most importantly, hold yourself accountable.
Yeah.
We're going to diversify by this date. And understanding that diversity takes time. We may grow in waves, you know, because also I think on the other side of the coin is, have we created a culture where diverse people want to be a part of our organization? Because you can recruit all day long, but people may not want to be a part of your organization, whether it be because of the history or the reputation or the current leadership. So there also may be that internal work that you need to do to prepare your organization to be more welcoming to people from diverse groups. But it's possible. We've seen it happen before. I mean, we're seeing it happen on the streets now. We're seeing people coming together in all different types of walks of life, all different races and ethnicities, all different levels of ability, education, socioeconomic status. I mean, there were white coats for Black lives. You know, those are some people that are making way more money than I'm making, you know? So, I mean, there's diversity in the movement. So it's definitely possible. I think we just have to be intentional and we have to hold ourselves accountable to it.
So, thank you, Terrell. You gave me some very poignant things to think about and bring back to the group. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, definitely.
Thank you. So if you all have any other questions, feel free to email Terrell.
Yes.
Yes. His email is on that slide, and I think he will probably share this slideshow with us too, possibly, if that's okay. Would you like to share that to us? You can keep your CEO information on there. You have proprietary rights to it. We just want to share it.
Gotcha. I'll share it with you. What I was going to say is I see a lot of Black and brown faces on the call, but I haven't gotten any questions. You know, I'm a straight shooter type of person. So, you know, this is that part where what does it mean to be pro LGBTQ in the Black community? I mean, come on, my Black community. I see our faces on the call. I would love to get a question. That's just the type of person I am. If you're ever going to ask somebody a question that's just like totally open and honest, now would be your time. Don't let it go by.
If I may, actually, I do have a question. I'd like to start, though. Terrell, thank you for sharing this information, your story, your voice. Thank you. I work at a high school up here in Fishers, as you know, is a predominantly white area. I was able to connect with a couple of students over the course of this past school year, one of whom, well, both are students who identify as people of color. One identifies as transgender, the other is non-binary. Now they're young folk, limited mobility. They don't have a lot of familial support for their identities. So I'm kind of curious to know, are there specific organizations or tactics that I ought to adopt to support them as they're existing in this educational space that superficially claims to accept them, but institutionally and structurally doesn't do a lot to make good on that policy?
Absolutely. So IYG is an amazing organization, Indiana Youth Group. They work with youth up to ages 21. They have a drop-in center. Obviously, things are different right now due to COVID. So I'm not sure the particulars of how their drop-in center and things work now, but they have everything from a food pantry, counselors. They help with housing, with mental health. So IYG, Indiana Youth Group, is an amazing organization. Now with this LGBTQ people of color, IYG is an affirmative organization. I have worked with them as well, but sometimes, like, just total transparency, it's like perception versus reality. So the perception for people of color maybe isn't the most welcoming space for me, but I'll always invite people of color to go because I've always felt comfortable there. But then there are also organizations that work specifically with LGBTQ youth, like the organization BU Wellness Organization. I used to work with them. They have a program called Image, which is a program specifically that provides support for LGBTQ youth of color. They also had a drop-in center. They did drop-ins once a week, like Friday nights, and they help with similar services like IYG. So those would be the two organizations that are closely located to Indianapolis that I would suggest connecting students with. I also know it's very challenging working inside of the schools just because a lot of schools and administrations are really conservative and we're still in Indiana, but both organizations are willing and able. If they're allowed, they can come into the school, they can do presentations, they can work with small classrooms. So that's also available as well. But definitely IYG or BU Wellness. And it's just www.iy. Hold on. I'm going to look up their website and post it in the chat. There's Indiana Youth Group and BU Wellness Organization. They are two really, really phenomenal organizations. And they have really great support. They can connect them to therapists as well. Also some gender affirming services as well. So that's for folks who may be on the trans spectrum. I always recommend Eskenazi, because they have a really great transgender clinic, and they have really great services for trans youth as well. So Eskenazi has really great gender affirming services.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would like to add one more to your list, Terrell. Gender Nexus.
Yes, thank you. Gender Nexus.
They are really great for gender nonconforming, trans, genderqueer folks. They provide chest binders, instruction on how to utilize chest binders and artificial phallic equipment. So it's something that I have previously referred folks to as well too, especially PFLAG as well too. And PFLAG is for parents of individuals that are queer identified or trans identified as well too, for support. Thank you, Terrell. every time we speak, it's just like you blow my mind. So if you all have any other questions, Terrell did leave his email address on the PowerPoint, but if you can drop that into the chat as well, that would be great. He's very responsive, and he has been doing some really great work in Washington, D.C. as well. So he's the person to contact for this work too. And I'm so very, very fortunate that he was able to talk to us today. So thank you so much, you all, for joining this conversation. I hope you all got a lot from it, and that it's so important to see the full person when we're trying to support folks. Dr. Couch and we did a presentation on how to serve the whole student, the whole person. And it's so essential that we see beyond our superficial scope of when we are serving people, that we have to see the intersections within, and that's how we're going to make changes. That's how we're going to be able to make strides within not just Ivy Tech, but we know Ivy Tech is a microcosm of the world. We know if we serve better within our community college, that we'll be able to serve better in our communities as well. So thank you so much, Terrell, for being able to speak to us today. Thank you so much for all of you all that came from different spaces. I mean, not just from Ivy Tech, but around the community as well. And talk to you all later.
Bye, have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.